that all of human beings are shaped, our human history is shaped by this schism, this battle between paradigms. In this case, we're using for the sake of language the Aristotelian and Platonic frameworks. It's not Manichaean. It's not like the Manichaean idea of good counterbalancing with evil, but rather these two frameworks where one is built upon the illusion of truth, the other one on the actual pursuit of truth.
Hi, welcome back to Notions of Progress. In the first two parts of this conversation, Matt Ehret traced what he sees as the foundational method of the Platonic tradition, how Plato thought, what the Academy was built to produce, and how the allegory of the cave has been read and misread over 2.5 millennia. In this final part 3, Ehret arrives at the civilizational stakes. His argument is that the divide between Plato and Aristotle is not a historical footnote or a matter of philosophical preference. It is, in fact, he contends, a structural fault line that runs through every era of Western intellectual history, including our own. And it determines in his reading whether a culture tends towards genuine discovery and advancement or toward increasingly sophisticated illusions of it. Sources reading in today's transcript can be found in Notions of Progress. Welcome. Now maybe we can go back a little bit, just talk a little bit about Aristotle in terms of like kind of what he, when he showed up at the Academy. You don't have to give like a whole history of his time at the Academy, but just more like, what do you think he was responding to, and what because what I would love to do in the time that we have left, Matt, is understand what is Plato's, what is Aristotle's view of progress, and where does this tension really lie? So if somebody had to explain the difference between those two, really what it comes down to, if you don't mind, give that a shot.
I would say the core difference of the two in the shortest amount of words is one posits a noun-driven universe and the other a verb-driven universe. One is more process-oriented, discovery-oriented. The other one is more memorize, explanatory-oriented, but not discovery-oriented. So the noun-based idea of descriptive reality, that's more, you could say, the flow that one gets out of Aristotle, who innovated a method of analysis. It's not just the particulars of what he says, which are not always all that bad. He doesn't say a lot of things that you'd necessarily disagree with. There are some things that are abhorrent, but a lot of the things he says are, like, okay, yeah, he likes freedom, he likes democracy, he likes but number one is being genuine. Number two, does his method actually allow those things to happen? And I would say everything is in the method, and he's actually giving you a method where he's saying, okay, he uses the a priori method. So he says, if you want to be a responsible thinker, you have to adopt this a priori method, which begins with starting with core axioms, lists of axioms and assumptions that you just begin with, that are unquestionable, that are perfect, they're closed. And upon these closed, limited axioms and postulates and definitions, we just give things in a closed, absolute language. With those building blocks, you can now begin to make sense of the chaos and fluidity of the discoverable world you're born into and try to map it and navigate it. If you do that, I would say, and Plato I think would agree, that you will become more enmeshed within the shadows of the cave. You will not become more free. You will become only the illusion of freedom, and the illusion of agency will increase, but you will become more of a human automata, a human robot, in effect, which, because of that method, will result in your feelings, in your actions, being highly predictable, highly baked in, like a robot. An AI bot, for example, is subservient to those core axioms that the programmer puts into the algorithms that then set up the behavior of how that AI bot is going to problem solve or content create anywhere down the line, similar to how a human will be programmed through an Aristotelian method of core axioms that are unbridgeable and that accept blindly in certain universals that are not proven to be true. They just are accepted as true, and so blind faith, the absence of knowledge, is the foundation upon which then knowledge is built, which again, you can't build something from nothing, and so you're actually building on nothings, thinking that they're somethings, which makes it very dangerous. As you become more successful as a lawyer, as a scholar, as a teacher, as a whomever in that kind of world, which is also why Plato liked very much talking to the shoemakers, the woodworkers. He liked talking to the craftsmen because even though they had a simplicity to them, they had what they did know as real knowledge was really earned, and you could really. So he much preferred talking to those types of craftsmen more so than the more dangerous politician or lawyer class, or because they would typically never have any grounding of anything that would base their so-called impressive sounding words and knowledge on anything real. But, the illusion was higher, their arrogance was thus higher, their humility was way lower, and their dangerousness of being offended when their egos get slighted much higher, as Socrates got to feel the brunt of that when he was, induced to drink the poison and die for offending certain, wannabe overlords.
So, and so within that framework that you paint, Mac, what about the idea, because you mentioned agency, how would you describe, let's say, the role of human agency vis-a-vis Plato versus Aristotle in this case, or the lack thereof?
Yeah, well, Plato creates the foundations around which true sovereignty of the individual will increase, true freedom of will, freedom of action will increase by virtue of you developing a better and better and better relationship every day with your soul, and the immortal better parts of you that show as lead, as he points out in the Gorgias, that the better part show as lead the worst part within us. The flesh should be led by the interest of the soul, not the soul should not be dragged by the interest of the flesh. But, the Native Americans have a similar wisdom that they've put in their own words too, that, when asked, when asking an elder, I don't know if this is the Mohawks or the Shawnee, or I'm not too sure which, but, this is a native legend or native wisdom of a young man asking how to become a better person, and having it described that we all have within us by an elder two wolves that are always at odds with each other, and he asks, but which wolf is going to win? Describing the wolf of the ego, the wolf of the sensual realm, and the wolf representing the spirit and the better part of ourselves. And he's like, the answer he gets is whichever one you feed. And it's the same kind of lessons you see in Confucius. You see the same kind of lessons in Plato. And you see it as well manifesting in the Platonic followers of Plato in the form of Origen, later on an early church father, in his writings, or Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish Platonist, a rabbi who worked with Peter in Rome, combating Simon the magician and the Neoplatonic mystery cultists in Rome, who later on would influence even Christian doctrine around a healthy notion of the Trinity, and the Nicene Creed would be influenced, ironically, by this guy Philo of Alexandria, the Pythagorean Platonist, working with Peter. Against those, so you've got these two different schools, and I think anytime somebody uses, even if with an honest heart, but they use this Aristotelian method and they get too enmeshed with that method of thinking, they lose their free will. They lose their ability to have true understanding of what their soul actually is, what makes their soul better, what makes it healthier, what makes it sicker. That understanding is increasingly severed. And as such, we become more cloudy in our dreamland, our dreamscape, that makes us increasingly an instrument of forces that are not us, but that will use us for acts that might be even very destructive for our friends, our family, ourselves, and our broader human species, that we should be defending, not hurting, but we won't even know it. So a lot of people, they find themselves agents of influence of something that is evil, but they don't even know it because of the general way of the makeup, the way that they've been taught to think in that way that abides by and allows for blind faith in things, rather than discovering things to be true.
And Matt, and in the last few minutes that we have left, or at least for today, can you talk a little bit about your conception of open versus closed systems vis-a-vis these two philosophies that we've just spent and that you've just laid out for us so eloquently, so that people can understand what we're actually talking about in the Plato versus Aristotle model?
Yes, for sure, I could. That's those are terms that I found useful. That I was playing with them for some years, and originally, they derive from my studies of the philosophical writings of a modern Platonist by the name of Lyndon LaRouche, who passed away some years ago. But his writings I found to be very, very fruitful and very authentic as far as a follower and utilizer of the Platonic method. And I would study his works, especially there's a particular book called The Science of Christian Economy, but also the So You Wish to Learn All About Economics, and a few other very important, thorough essays, which got me to sort of become aware of the idea of that all of human beings are shaped, our human history is shaped by this schism, this battle between paradigms. In this case, we're using for the sake of language the Aristotelian and Platonic frameworks. It's not Manichaean. It's not like the Manichaean idea of good counterbalancing with evil, but rather these two frameworks where one is built upon the illusion of truth, the other one on the actual pursuit of truth. The sophist who pursues wisdom without the love of it, the other one being the lover of wisdom who pursues it for the authentic reasons. And so now LaRouche uses different terms to try to help people understand that dichotomy. One of the things was entropic and anti-entropic language. So he's like, one system is, you could say, using a scientific terminology, entropic, founded upon principles of decay, of death, of the absence of life, which is basically what entropy is if you extend a process of high complexity in time, as it unfolds, as let's say a machine, it has many parts to that system moving for a purpose, that there's less energy that causes the parts to move as time passes, as the fuel burns down, because there's an unlimited amount of fuel you can put into a motor. And it will eventually be pulled teleologically towards some future point of heat death where less and less can possibly happen. Potential for change decreases in time.
And that's within a closed system.
Within a closed system. And within an anti-entropic system, which is a much more healthy, natural way of organizing human thought and action, would be the opposite. You start with something that has a certain limited amount of potential, but then that is always increasing based on new creative inputs and discoveries by those parts within that system of humanity in this case. And, I think when you look at the evidence of ontological reality in physics, just without any assumptions of standard models of physics that are taught in school or biology, Darwinian biology, just let all of those assumptions go and just look at the trend of life from 500 million years ago, of the Precambrian simple-celled amoebas that were, it appears, the only thing really that we could say was living on the Earth, to the different grades, the different gradients of more complex, more interesting life appearing at different moments. You have a choice to say, okay, based on this moment we're at now and that moment that was then of living matter, we have change. Was the change directed by any principles? Is there progress? Are things getting are they moving in an entropic or anti-entropic way? Which one is it? Or is it totally random, which would be more inclined to entropy? Well, I think the data, if we don't take axioms, assumptions into it, and just look at the data, I would say it's probably the case that there's some sense of purposefulness and direction and beauty and symmetry that is guiding this process, that's allowing us to have this discussion over space and time using the electrical medium from amoebas. And the same thing for the formation of solar systems, right? The questions of why should our solar system and any solar system be arranged in the ordering principles that we find the planets arranged as they do? And is it random or is it purposeful? What about the periodic table of elements? Is that just a random unfolding, with all of the different isotopes that also occur in periodic ways? Or is there an organization, a beauty, a symmetry to it that has purpose maybe baked into it, even that's not put there by humans, but that's already there, and humans are capable of uncovering and discovering what that is? So I think that the Platonic way is much more open system, much more anti-entropic. The other ways that one would attempt to approach it, Neoplatonic or Aristotelian, would incline towards destroying our powers of productivity over time, destroying our potential to reproduce our species over time as the physical potential constraints close in on what we're capable of doing, and the thus Malthusian trappings that are predicted by the Thomas Malthuses, the Henry Kissingers, will tend to then manifest more and more as we lack creativity. We'll tend to wear down the soil, we'll wear down the resources, we won't overcome those things through and so the consequences of overpopulation, of demographic crises, and things that Plato describes in Book 2 of the Republic, when he describes he's like, okay, we're having trouble seeing justice on an individual level. Let's try to scale up and see if maybe it's more visible on a social level with many people. Let's try a simple community. Now let's say that community, which requires food and water and organization, let's say that it wants to have a little bit of abundance and with that abundance, a little bit of luxury. Well, with that luxury, let's say it's going to need to cut down more trees. Okay, well, that's going to mean that they're going to grow into that new space okay, well, let's say they're going to inevitably start protruding upon some other social group. Well, they're going to fight, right? Okay, so they're going to fight for territory if that happens. Well, then what do they do? And he starts building up, again, one of the traps. He's like, number one, did they have to fight? Well, according to that dialogue, Glaucon just accepts, yes, we have to fight now. Okay, well, if that's the case and you can't think of anything else, well, let's now proceed onward. Well, who do we need? We need guardians. Okay, well, how do we train guardians then? If they're going to have power, how are they? Well, dogs, humans are like dogs, right? Yes, of course, they're like dogs. Okay, so then, well, if that's the case, how do we train our dogs? Well, okay, we breed the best dogs. Okay, well, got some golden souls that are born into bronze-souled families. That's not natural. It's like, no, it's not natural. So what do you do with them? Well, you got to probably, I guess, exterminate those kids if they're, So, but he's building up basic, simple economies and trying to tickle your creativity, your sense of, like, injustice. So it's through a negative. He's like, okay, it's not just that we do these things, but can you solve the problem? Let's ban poets. Like one of the things he says in the Republic is, well, look at the world of Athens around Plato. I mean, people are becoming drunk on theater and theatrical plays of Homer and the gods warring and sexing it out and all of these immoral tendencies expressed poetically by the gods that were popular in the world that Plato was living in. And he's like, look how corrupting the influence is, that people think the gods who are perfect are actually these very debauched beings. And he's like, well, I guess the only thing we could do to stop society from sliding into decadence and corruption and decay would be to then ban poetry and the arts. It's like, yes, I guess so. And so people are today horrified by some of these conclusions that Plato is making, but they're not realizing that he also says within that same breath, but if anybody now or in the future can challenge us to find a better reason why we should let poets back into the Republic, let them do it, and we will certainly welcome them back in. He's challenging the friggin' readers to come up with a better line of investigation than what is being presented in that dialogue. It's engaging. He's having a dialogue with us that's transcending time. He's been dead for 2,500 years, but yet it's an ongoing conversation that's going to still be had 1,000 years in the future for people who read these things with an honest heart and confront these universal problems of the species.
Matt, if I could just put a kind of a close on this, if you will, it's not unimaginable to understand this in today's context, right? In other words, that people were, even during that time, were cherry picking what he was saying and leaving off what was the intention. But if you just took the sentence, let's ban poets and let's ban, and you didn't give that second part or the explanation that you gave before about the cave, then you're taking it out of context and you're slicing it up and dicing it. I'm just saying, in today's media world, that doesn't seem like such a far stretch to me.
Thanks.
Well, Matt, I just want to thank you for this tremendous contribution that you made, and for all the work that you and Cynthia are doing. I realized the difficulty in trying to put this all together into a short, succinct way. How difficult.
Well, it's a good challenge. I appreciate you creating the context and the impetus for that, and I hope that we can continue to explore these important topics going forward. And it's edifying to me. I hope edifying to your audience, and I hope it inspires people to read some Plato. The dialogues are just such a treat for people to just turn off their Netflix for a couple of nights and just read a couple of dialogues instead and see what it does to make you better.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again, Matt. I'm going to stop it now and leave you hang for 1 second. We'll chat. Thanks again.
Sure.
This concludes part 3 of a 3-part interview with Matt Ehret. Ehret's argument that the Plato-Aristotle divide functions as a civilizational operating system is one reading of a debate that scholars have engaged for centuries. In the episodes ahead, that divide gets tested against the historical record and against scholars who read it very differently. The next episode turns directly to Aristotle himself, what he actually argued and what scholars have made of it, and why the question of progress looks very different when you start from his text rather than Plato's. Thanks for listening to this series. Sources, reading, and today's transcript can be found at notionsofprogress.com. See you soon. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find Notions of Progress on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And all the sources, reading recommendations, and further context for every episode are in the show notes. If you are enjoying the series, liking the episode on YouTube and signing up for the newsletter at notionsofprogress.com really helps more people find these ideas. For those who want to go even deeper, the Curator's Flame blog and Substack newsletter accompany each episode with the questions the scholarship leaves open. I'm Marshall, tracing ideas of progress from antiquity to the age of AI and leaving the debates open for you to consider. Until next time.